Hello, everybody. This is Todd Dewey from Ice Road Truckers on the History Channel, and I love to listen to TNC Radio.live.
Join Dr. Chris Cortman for Building Strong Minds Mondays at 7, 6 Central, TNCRadio.live. You're listening to Mind Your Trucking Business on TNCRadio.live, where James Rogers, Jamie Irvine, and Tom Kelly provide owner-operators of commercial trucks with expert advice about starting, operating, and growing a professional trucking fleet. It's time to mind your trucking business.
And welcome in TNC Radio.live. This is Mind Your Trucking Business. And guys, it's going to be an interesting discussion tonight. I'm Tom Kelly, along with Jamie Irvin and James Rogers. And guys, we've got plenty to discuss tonight. As we record this, September the 15th, 2022, America has narrowly averted a railroad strike about, not quite 12 hours ago. A handshake was made, and we have a collective bargaining agreement that's going out to the multiple railroad unions, all of whom are expected to accept the new collective bargaining agreement. We don't have details of that by the time we're doing this recording. We don't have all the details. Doesn't really matter for our perspective what all those details were. They weren't really striking about money, guys. What they were really striking about more than anything else was a work-life balance, because it's very weird working in the railroad industry. Things like having a $6 per day per diem when you're not home for your food. Things like that they were saying, this is ancient. We need to, you need to be taking care of us better than you are. So this wasn't I want more dollars per hour so much as I need to be treated better, especially when I'm traveling away from my local rail yard. So that's what it came down to. Multiple unions involved, each with their own agenda, each coming around slowly to finally accepting what management wanted to do. We've got an agreement in place. It still needs to be ratified by the unions, usually not an issue. But guys, in the process of all of this, there's been a lot of things said back and forth around the transportation industry. The government has been, the government. And so there's a lot of mess going on here. So off air, before we got started here, James Rogers, you had some things you wanted to talk about, but before we go to you, let me start with Jamie. Jamie, how are you doing today, sir?
I am doing well. I'm watching this from the Great White North up here in Canada. And, a lot of the stuff that happens in the States has a direct impact on Canada. And a lot of times the Canadian government, at least our current federal government, follows the lead of your current administration. So anytime I see something like this story that we're talking about today, it does make me a little nervous. But you know what? I'm an optimist, and we just keep carrying on. So we'll talk about it today, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and I guess the question is, should we be an optimist at this point? It's a lot of gloom and doom out there. And so, James, let me go to you. You're on the road today, are you?
I am. I'm back out on the road for about the remainder of this week, going into next week. So,
all right. Well, you were saying that there's kind of been an interesting reaction to the president's address yesterday, where essentially he was saying if the railroad does go on strike, he's going to be counting on the trucking industry to help things out and all that. That didn't go over real well, huh?
No, it didn't. It did not. Myself, I actually watched both addresses. I saw the press secretary's daily brief, and then actually the president's brief as well, where they were pretty much on knees begging the trucking industry for support if this goes down, that they were going to need us more than ever. And the reaction that came after that, personally, I know how I felt. It didn't go over well with me. And then I know as well, my phone just rang all night long. And then, of course, going into a good chunk of this morning, I finally just put it on silent because a lot of independent owner operators, one truck operators, and even, some peers that owns their own fleets bigger than mine as well, are not happy about that request because of what we've been doing over the last 2 years, which, we'll go more into that, but no, it was not a good reaction at all.
What was the request as you saw it?
The request I saw was basically they wanted us to pick up the load of the rails going down. I mean, to basically go back to what it was during COVID and go all out, whatever we needed to do to try to keep this country going. With the way that I saw it, and a lot of others are seeing it, is we've been doing that for the last 2 years, 3 years, and it's just been a slow decline of, independent owner operators, smaller fleets, some bigger fleets just getting driven out of business at the hands of the choices and policies that this administration are making. And I mean, like I said, they're not happy. They're like, really, it's at this point, and I'll stop here because I don't want to go too much into it, but until we get further into discussion. But now a lot of people are like, what's in it for us? We've been doing this for the last 2 years. What's in it for us at this point? So they're not happy. Not happy at all.
So yeah, keep going. I want to understand more.
Well, I mean, you look at it like ever since COVID happened, they've released, they obviously lifted the hours of service exemptions, but then the price of freight, volumes of freight, and ever since then, fuel cost has gone up, and they've done nothing but nickel and dime us with, we can't get parts, we can't do this, we can't, little pieces of regulation just keep continuing to get thrown down our throats. They keep trying to portray this driver shortage issue. And once again, I go back to it, the cost of fuel. No reason that the cost of fuel should be as high as it is. No reason for it. But now, when the rails threaten to shut down, you come back to us when we've been supporting this country all in, like even for myself, I'll speak for myself personally on this part. 9 months straight, I stayed out supporting my country. I'm all about supporting my country as a veteran and not damaging infrastructure. But for 9 months, I stayed out. And I know my fleet has been running wide open ever since this has gone on. And then they really do. A lot of this was used quite often in a lot of phone calls that this government administration has the nerve to say they want more when we've been given all we can give, but yet they have done nothing but try to drive the small business in trucking out. What are they going to do for us? What are you going to do for us? Are you going to continue to send our oil reserves overseas, which is going to drive the cost of fuel up? Or are you going to do what you can do to drive the cost of fuel down to allow us to do that? Because in order to do what they're asking, that means more truck on the road, more time on the road, more rubber on the road, more use of fuel, more man hours. Are you going to allow the cost, the rates to be driven through the floor again? It's what are they going to do for us? That's kind of the stance that a lot of drivers are taking. I can't argue with them with those points. I can't. All I can say is I don't know. I don't know. I mean, this is new. I know how it emotionally makes me react, which I can't. I'm with them. I'm with them. I don't know how much more we can give until they start giving something back.
Jamie, let's talk on the Canadian side of things here for a minute. We obviously saw the government take a hardline stance against the trucking industry several months ago. And I'm wondering, at this point, how is the Canadian trucking industry? How are they feeling emotionally? What is the overall sense of the state of the union, if you will, within the industry?
Okay, so I think I want to define they, because James was saying they. Who is they? So the way I see it is, politically in Canada, we have a multi-party system, right? But we have coalitions between people who are liberal and people who are conservative. So if you boil it down to the end of the day, we've got about 4 federal parties that are liberal and that are radical left, and we have one federal party, 2 federal parties now that are conservative, although only one of them is any real player in politics here in Canada. Mm-hmm. So I'm very torn, because as James was talking, I could really feel his emotion. I can understand all these truckers calling him and their feelings, and I understand why, because here in Canada, when the trucking convoy started, one of the founding members of that trucking convoy was a native, or like an indigenous person. She's Métis. Okay, so Tamara is Métis. She's not Caucasian. She's not white. She's not European. And yet our prime minister labeled the trucking industry and the people who were supporting the truckers' convoy as a fringe minority, misogynistic, homophobic, white supremacist, racist, and bigots. How is a Métis woman a white supremacist? I don't understand. When we talk about, sorry,
I was going to say at the end. I was going to add to that. At the end of that, if I'm not mistaken, Trudeau publicly labeled them domestic terrorists as well.
That's correct. Now, so again, we have to get, like, humans are very, very good at us versus them, right? It's deep within our DNA. We are tribal by nature, and it served us very, very well in times when you were a group of 20 people and you were fighting for your very survival. But of course, in this modern post-industrial age, this us versus them, it's got to stop, because it's killing the West, and enemies of Western civilization and philosophies that are centered on freedom know this. They've known this since the early days of communism in the 20th century, and they learned very quickly that all out war with us wasn't going to work, and so they changed their approach to try to undermine our entire way of operating. And so I'm very conflicted by this, because there's so many different elements to this, and it's so easy for us to boil it down to one thing or the other. But I think we need to go into a very deep discussion today about that. So I think after our break, we'll come back and we'll add to this conversation.
All right, we'll take a quick break. Be back here in just a couple of minutes. You're listening to TNC Radio.live. This is Mind Your Trucking Business. Stay right there.
Trucking Moves America Forward, or TMAF, is boosting the image of the industry by telling the story of trucking, and your story can be part of it. Upload a photo, tell us what you love about trucking, or send us a story about a good deed or charitable act in trucking. Be sure to follow us on social media and contact us through truckingmovesamerica.com. That's truckingmovesamerica.com.
You're listening to Mind Your Trucking Business on TNCRadio.live.
Great leaders challenge their people not to stop at the first right answer. Tighten the Lug Nuts is the book that will help you move past that first right answer to be more effective, more productive, and more successful. This book serves as a blueprint that can be easily applied by leaders, entrepreneurs, truckers, owner-operators, all of us in our everyday lives. This is one of the best leadership books you can read to help you accelerate towards your personal and professional goals. Plus, a portion of the proceeds will be donated to truckerschristmasgroup.org. Visit TightenTheLugNuts.com to order your copy today.
You're listening to TNC Radio.live. Remember to tune into the Truckers Network Show with Shelley Johnson. Weekdays at 3 p.m. Central, 4 p.m. Eastern.
Welcome back to Mind Your Trucking Business on TNCRadio.live.
And thank you, Ron. Welcome back in TNC Radio.live. Mind Your Trucking Business. I'm Tom with James and Jamie. Jamie, you were kind of on a thought there when we had to go to break, so let me kick it back to you again. Keep going with what you were saying.
Okay, so again, with humans, we're very, very good at us versus them thinking, and it's very easy to paint everybody with the same brush, right? So we could say, look, everybody on the left, they're all radical lefts, and they hate the West, and they're actively undermining everything that the people on the right that are conservatives stand for. And it's a neo-Marxist attack on liberal and democratic values. It's very easy for us to paint that brush. I can tell you, some of the liberals in Canada, they stood up publicly and fought back against our prime minister when the prime minister was attacking the trucking industry, and it cost them, in many ways, it cost them their jobs. They had to switch from being a liberal candidate to an independent, and then when the election came, they were ousted. They lost their cabinet seats and so on and so forth. So I'm not going to say that everybody who is liberal is against us any more than everybody who is conservative is for us. But there are some macro issues here at play, and I think it's time for us as an industry to really think about what we're going to do next. Because, you know, in Canada, our government has been very, very hard on the trucking industry. We still do not have the freedom to move in and out of our country without a passport, or not a passport, sorry, without a there's an app, it's called ArriveCan, and you have to fill it out, and you have to disclose your medical status and your vaccination status in order to get back into your country. That is in direct violation of the Charter of Rights of Canadians. But in addition to that, if you're a trucker or you're an American business person with Canadian interests, you cannot enter our country without that vaccine. So you've got these issues going on. You have these federal governments, both in Canada and the States, who have been attacking the trucking industry. In the States, we've seen laws going after owner operators. We've seen other laws that have been very, very problematic for truckers, and just making it more and more difficult for us to do the work that we do. And so we have to ask ourselves, what are we going to do next? And if we aren't careful, we can't have another administration in the States, and we can't have another 10 years in Canada of this more radical left ideology that is attacking the very underpinnings. Never mind your political or thoughts around ideology politically, just macroeconomics that affect the trucking industry. Like, we're not going to continue to be able to operate in a profitable way with crazy high energy costs, with the devaluation of our currencies, with the erosion of our freedoms. Like, this isn't going to work long term. And so what do we do next as an industry to send a clear message to our elected officials that we stand for certain values and that we need certain economic policies in place to make our industry sustainable? And as the president has clearly seen, and one day maybe even our prime minister will acknowledge, without the trucking industry, the society that we come to rely on will come to a grinding halt in less than 30 days. Mm-hmm. So this is serious business here. And we are on the precipice of the potential of making the crisis we're already in much, much worse. And this gives me many, many mixed emotions.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, even me, like I said, I know the emotion when I watched that. I know the emotion that I felt. If it was initially, it was like a twofold. You know, the veteran came back out of me real quick of, okay, the country's calling for need again. But at the same time, it was that like lesson learned. Okay, I've been through this once before. And now as a civilian and a small business owner, man, you killed us. I mean, even as the independent, we literally sat back and watched and when I say they, I'm talking about the government, whether they're at this point, whether they're conservative, liberal, independent. I'm tying them all in together because I don't see any movement on any part. I see them fighting back and forth for their own agenda rather than what's for the betterment of the people. But to get back on topic, it's what we literally broke our necks to keep this country moving. And then you're asking for this while at the same time, well, just for lack of better words, and I'm going to use the terms that was used, was just continue to crap down our neck. I mean, just literally just drive it down our throat. We watched the government, just like it did in the past, subsidize large carriers. And I'm going to use Yellow Freight for an example. During COVID, they were they were one of the public ones that got out publicly. $7.5 million they were given as a subsidy or a bailout during COVID, only for them to turn around and file bankruptcy within 6 months. But yet you couldn't help the small fleet owner or the independent contractor that make up the majority of this industry, the trucking industry in particular. You couldn't help us. You couldn't subsidize us when we moved more of the freight tonnage wise faster and a lot safer than I guess you could say the ATA supported companies that they subsidized. I mean, you had FedEx up there that were standing by the president, DHL, UPS, which UPS is getting ready to go on strike as well. I mean, what do? The people that are here for continuously for this country, you've strangled and strangled, and you're correct. That was actually one of the things when I asked the question, what's the answer? One of the owners, and he owns a fairly sizable small fleet, he said, now, if there was any time now for truckers to make a statement with this pending result of a vote going to these unions, now would be the time to shut the trucks down, because you don't need to march on DC. You don't need to do nothing, because nothing would move, because it's got to come off the rail and get on a truck. Yeah, it's got to come off the rail and get on a truck sometime. We don't have to do nothing. We could literally shut it down and nothing would move across this country, and it wouldn't take 30 days. It would take 72 or less.
Oh, absolutely. 30-day. My 30-day statement is literally the end of Western civilization. Within 72 hours, you would have all the food gone from all the grocery stores. The medicine would be gone. The oxygen at hospitals would be gone. Like we're talking martial law within a week. We're talking death in the streets within 2 weeks, and we're talking complete economic and societal collapse within 30 days. So here's the thing that I'm concerned about, James. I want to give you guys, and if you want to learn more about it, just Google Strauss and Howe generational theory, or just Google the fourth turning. But there is an macroeconomic theory that says, look, over the last 500 plus years in Western civilization, we've been on roughly an 80-year macro cycle that has 4 stages to it. And let me just give you a couple of the historical times when we were at crisis at the end of this 80-year period, roughly 80-year period. We'll go back to the American Revolution. Pretty bad time, right? War, revolution, death. Now it led to the birth of the United States, which then led to a great high after that crisis. Guess what the next one was? The Civil War. The American Civil War, crisis, brother killing brother, right? Cousin killing cousin. Let's fast forward to the next period of time where this crisis period arose, the Great Depression and World War II. By the way, World War I was part of the unraveling. So here we are again at what's called the fourth turning in this macroeconomic theory. And right now, it says that we're in this period of time, we're in crisis, and we have things like the Great Recession of 2008, which was the beginning of it. We have the the COVID-19 pandemic recession, and the Russian-Ukrainian war. Now, if we're not careful, when we look back in the history books at this time period of crisis, we could add things like another American Civil War or World War III. That could be added. The crisis is not over, and it could get worse. And that's what I mean by we have to be so very, very careful as a society, as an industry, of what we advocate for and what we do, because it's bad now, but it can get a whole hell of a lot worse. And so we have to tread very carefully, but we can't just leave the current direction and the current policies that are in place unchecked, because they're destroying us. Yeah. And so we are, the proverbial rock in a hard place. We have to be very careful, because we could make this a lot worse, but at the same time, we can't do nothing.
No. And I agree. And this was kind of like back when COVID happened. I was working with my senators and stuff very closely, trying to figure something out for small business, like for trucking in specific. And I actually wrote a paper. I don't know how far it went, but I did. I wrote it and I sent it. And one of the things that I concluded to was that the question that was asked me was, how can we fix it? How can we fix it? That was what was presented. And the answer that I kind of gave, and I'm just summarizing it, was I don't think that when you use we, I don't think the people can fix it, other than to take a stand somewhere in the sand, so to speak, to draw a line. Because the government has interjected themselves so deeply into our lives with policy, with rules and all this other stuff. They've got to undo all that. And that's exactly what I said. You have to undo all that. You are hamstringing the capability of industries around this economy, and the people of this country that you're strangling us. It was just strangling. And I've been saying for a long time that the result of COVID and the effects that it did and the policies and the actions that were taken, those were not going to be over. And here we are still seeing the fallout from that. It's not over. And so I mean, the only answer I have is still stands firm in that paper is the government is going to have to fix this. They have to fix this. And us people, they're going to have to take a stand. So I'm with you. We're a very dangerous spot.
I agree totally. And when we come back from our break, I want to continue the conversation centered around what we, the people, can do, because I think that is a critical piece and we have to be very careful. And I'd like to share my thoughts on that. So when we come back, we're going to continue this conversation, and we look forward to engaging with you in the weeks to come and get your opinions on this, because we appreciate you listening and we want to hear from you. So we'll be right back.
Hey drivers, did you hear music on TNCRadio.live that you really liked? Or maybe you heard us interview an author of a book you'd like to read or listen to. You can get the books, music, and other products you hear about by going to our website at www.tncradio.live and clicking on the shopping cart.
Ride the Southern Route with Shannon Courier Tuesdays at 7, 6 Central on tncradio.live.
Our grocery stores are stocked. Our packages arrive in just a few short days. No matter the day or season, we can thank America's truck drivers for the efficient delivery of over 10 billion tons of goods a year that we rely on. On this National Truck Driver Appreciation Week, we offer a big thank you to professional truck drivers for hauling the everyday goods that meet our daily needs. We thank a trucker. Brought to you by Trucking Moves America Forward at truckingmovesamerica.com. Follow us on social media at TruckingFWD.
Welcome back to Mind Your Trucking Business on TNCRadio.live.
Welcome back in TNCRadio.live. I'm Tom, along with Jamie and James, and having a spirited discussion today in kind of the shadow, if you will, of the nearly averted railroad strike and some of the things that were said by the top of the U.S. government. And again, this is not a political station. We don't take off our shoes and beat on the desk and scream about Republicans and Democrats. However, we talk about a heavily regulated industry, and we can't help but to point out when policies and rules, laws, etc., negatively impact the proper functioning of the trucking industry. So, Jamie, as somebody who lives in Canada but traverses both sides of the border, somebody who has for a very long time been tracking the transportation and shipping industry across the North America, I think you get it. I think you can hear the passion in the voice of somebody like James as a small business owner at this crucial time. How are you going to fix this, Jamie? And I don't mean just you personally, but where do we start? Because it feels too big. It feels like I can't do anything, so I'm just going to give up and I'm going to go do something different, or I'm going to just drive my truck and shut up because I can't make a difference.
And that is I know the feeling, but that is the exact opposite thing of what should be done.
All right.
Okay. So let's just talk about some fundamentals here. Okay. Humans have been on this planet a very long time. And we grew up in a time of industrial and digital revolution, and we are used to things changing very rapidly. But we have to understand that for thousands and thousands of years, your life experience 1,000 years ago and then 800 years ago was virtually identical. Nothing changed. Nothing got better. Your abundance and your capacity for abundance was virtually, it didn't move. It was just people just don't understand that, because we've always lived in a time of dramatic change, and we've lived in a time where technology has given us the tools to be able to do things that we just couldn't do before. So you got to kind of get your head in the right place, right? We have lived in a very special time, but not just technology, not just the industrial and digital revolution did this. It started with a radical idea, which was that if you give people more freedom, they will create more abundance for everybody. Freedom equals abundance. Freedom equals peace. The more freedom people have, the better things get for everybody. And if you buy into that basic concept, then the direction we have gone, especially since COVID, where we have removed freedoms from people, we have hamstrung the free market. We're doing things that are eroding these core fundamentals that allowed the most upward mobility economically that the humans had ever seen in their entire history. And I don't care who you are, because if you go and look at like whatever political side of the spectrum you're on, that's fine. But all you have to do to know that this is a true fact is look at countries that aren't free and look at what they did economically to improve. China did not become an economic force until they removed some of the restrictions on the Chinese people and created a partially free market. All of a sudden, China then surged towards becoming an economic superpower. Look at any country that doesn't have a lot of freedom, and then look at the life experience of their citizens and compare and contrast that to anybody else who has more freedom, and you will immediately see a difference. So freedom is essential for us to move forward and get through this crisis. Freedom of speech, freedom of movement, free markets. This is the basis for the solution. And so the people need to send a clear message to their elected officials in such a massive volume that they no longer can be ignored. And that's not I'm not advocating any kind of violent action or any kind of radical action in any way at all, because that actually will be counter to our entire project here of trying to restore the very basic foundational pieces that we need to put back into place to get out of this crisis. That's only going to make it worse. What we need to do is we need to go back to those fundamentals, right? And the underpinning of freedom is this democratic system that we've set up that has worked relatively well for a very long time in bringing the whole world out of abject poverty and bringing more wealth to more people than ever before in human history. So if we can, as a group, a large enough group of people can say, look, we're not doing this, we're not going there, and if you don't change, we're going to change you through a democratically elected government that will represent these values. And so, I mean, what else can we do? Because the alternatives, they get ugly really fast, and we can make this crisis so much worse if enough people choose the wrong path. And I think back to, what's that saying that the road to Auschwitz was built, with hatred, but it was paved with apathy, right? Mm-hmm. The German people, by and large, weren't necessarily all these radical Nazis who were trying to kill their neighbors. They were just everyday people, and they were just like, well, I guess we'll just go along to get along, and maybe it'll stop. Now, I'm not making any comparison except for the principle of apathy. We cannot be apathetic. And as a Canadian, I can tell you, Canadians are by and large way more apathetic politically, in at least historically, than Americans ever were. Although that is changing because of the radical nature of our current federal government. But the point I'm just trying to make is that if we just go into that apathetic mode and put our heads down, just go to work, try to like just weather the storm. Oh my God, this can get so much worse. And so enough people have to stand up and say, we're not doing this anymore. And here's the policies and the principles that we want our elected officials to represent. And if you don't represent those, we're going to vote you out. We're going to put in an administration that will. That's the only thing government understands.
Thanks, Jamie. I appreciate that. I think there's a lot of wisdom there. James, as you listen to all of that, how does that strike you as a man on the street? Does that seem true, or does it seem, yeah, that's just good words? How do you feel about what Jamie's saying?
Well, I'm kind of torn on what he said, and I hear both sides of it. And for me personally, it kind of rings true to both sides. Is, the veteran in me and the person who's very patriotic 100% understands is that with the whole apathy part is you never want to see infrastructure or anything that's going to affect the people halted, because the people are the ones that are going to end up, paying the price. But at the end of the day, too, with that said, and I'm not going to use the term but, I'm going to use yet, is as a business owner and on the civilian side of it, of going through this for the last couple of years myself with my own fleet and then, of course, peers and stuff like that, it's like we've been doing that. We've been very apathetic. We've done everything we can to put that in place, and nothing seems to catch, our leadership's attention. They keep spewing the words, but there's been no action. It's been quite the opposite. It's been like you said, further restriction. I could use the COVID vaccinations are a prime example. As a driver, it was threatened at one point, if you didn't get the vaccination, they weren't going to allow you to enter certain states. We've got recently our very own Supreme Court voted to uphold a completely ridiculous law that put out 90%, I want to say close to probably 90%. That's just a throw in the air of the trucking business in California. You've got rising fuel costs. You've got continued regulations on us as an industry, and continued regulation on our freedom of movement as just individuals. I mean, we can't even get on an airplane unless you go through a whole COVID vaccination testing or you have the vaccination. You can't cross the border into Canada unless you have it. And from what I understand, Canada's actually trying to push a possible third shot in order to come across the border. Fourth. Okay, well, there you go. There's another one. I mean, it's like we've been playing by your rules for so long, and now it is to a tipping point of you're not changing. You're talking a good game, but you're not doing anything. And that's on both sides, from all parties of our leadership. And I think the American people are really getting tired of it. I think that they're really getting tired of it. And my personal feeling is I think they're getting to that point where it's like, if the worst case comes, it comes, but it's like nobody's wanting to pay attention. I think that's the general consensus, is that, that it's really not being, our screams for help are not being paid attention to at all. And that's just the general feeling that I get.
Yeah. And I get that. Tell you what, let's take one more break, come back. We'll try to put a wrapper on this. Lots of thoughts, but we'll tackle more of this in just a minute. You're listening to TNCRadio.live. Mind your trucking business. Stay right there. For the latest in traffic, weather, and information, catch the Morning Grind weekdays right here on TNCRadio.live.
I'm Shelley Johnson with Kathy Tuccaro. You can hear us Tuesdays on TNCRadio.live at 8 p.m. Eastern on Women Road Warriors. And don't miss Steve Summers' Overnight Drive right here on TNCRadio.live, weeknights midnight to 5 a.m. Eastern. Brought to you by Hot Shot Secret. Kathy Tuccaro is nothing short of amazing. She not only drives the world's biggest truck as a heavy equipment operator in northern Alberta, Canada. She's an international motivational speaker and the author of Dream Big, an autobiography about overcoming a lifetime of trauma and abuse that led to dreams of success. Kathy inspires people the world over to change their lives and improve their self-worth. Her book will change your life. She's passionate about personal growth and believes anyone can change their circumstances and overcome their obstacles if they believe in themselves. Her life will amaze you and seriously inspire you. Be sure to order a copy of her book, Dream Big, on Amazon.com.
TNCRadio.live, your commercial driver navigation station.
Welcome back to Mind Your Trucking Business on TNCRadio.live.
Welcome back, TNCRadio.live, Mind Your Trucking Business. I'm Tom Kelly, along with Jamie Irvin and James Rogers. Guys, it's been a spirited discussion here, to say the least, but not an inappropriate one. I think that the takeaway here is I think there's a lot more of people who are upset right now than gets painted in the mainstream media. I think there are a lot more people who are being radicalized on both sides than ever before, and some would say with good cause. And I'm not arguing that point. I'm just saying that this is a fact, that there are people who are thinking things that they've never thought before. And it did occur to me during my long drive here recently. When, it's interesting when you're sitting there driving, and you know this well, James. Sometimes you have these epiphanies while you're going down the road, and you're getting close to white line fever, and you're just kind of in a little bit of a daze, and then something jumps out and hits you, and it jumped out and hit me. There really could be a civil war.
Well, I've got some information about that. So there was now I saw this. The first time I saw this info, Tom, was on a TikTok video of Bernie Sanders. And Bernie Sanders is pretty much a socialist, but he's pulling data from a Gallup poll and the University of Chicago. So, I mean, the data appears at least to be legitimate. And here's what it says. According to the most recent Gallup poll, the approval rating for Congress is at 16%. With 82% of American people disapproving of the work that Congress is doing. According to the University of Chicago poll, a strong majority of Americans believe that the government is, and I quote, corrupt and rigged against me. US Today poll came out last week saying that a very strong majority no longer believes that the Democratic or Republican parties are responding to their needs, and that we may need to move to a multi-party system. And this is also a continuing quote from that. And most frighteningly, there is a growing number of Americans who believe that they may have to take up arms against their own government in order to accomplish what they think needs to be done. This is the point I was trying to make before. Things can get a lot worse. Mm-hmm. This crisis is not over, and things can get a hell of a lot worse if we're not very careful.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was wanting to say, really, without saying it, was that thought of the last comment you made is becoming a very true reality in a lot of people across this country, a lot of people in this industry as well, because it's what do they do? Like I said, it's as if they're making screams. They keep wanting the people to speak, but they're not listening or responding.
Well, what's more dangerous, James? A well-fed, well-taken care of soldier at a low rank, or a desperate civilian fighting for their life to protect their very existence?
Well, the logical answer to that would be the soldier, the well-fed soldier. But, and I use "but" there for a reason, history has shown that the starving, desperate individual is more dangerous, and I will use Afghanistan as an example.
Well, right. I think you can use what we're seeing over at in the Ukraine right now, where we're watching a people's army kick butt. I mean, they're kicking butt, and especially this week, it could be a very dangerous thing. So, point well taken there, Jamie.
See, that's the thing that I'm concerned about, Tom, is here you have hardworking Canadians, Americans in the trucking industry, they're family people. They're being labeled as extremists. They're being labeled as misogynistic, homophobic, white supremacists, racist and bigots, domestic terrorists. It's ridiculous. And the thing is nobody, I've never met someone in the trucking industry who wasn't like salt of the earth kind of person, just wants to like make a better life for their family and go to work every day. They want to just go to work and make $1. And the thing that scares me is if you take these people and you push them and push them and push them into this corner where they are feeling like they have no other recourse and they become desperate, things get very dangerous very quickly. And this is by no means a call to arms or advocating for any kind of radical or violent behavior. We're not doing that at all. We're just stating reality. When people get desperate, things get dangerous. That's just the way it works. Yep.
And that's kind of where, and it all ties back to that. Like for me, over the last couple hours it all stems back to that, literally that call for help, I guess you could say, by this administration. Like it literally did. It triggered a response that I was not expecting, that people are really, you have the audacity to ask that after you've put, and everything we've talked about is what I'm talking about as far as crapping down the neck of this industry and the people. You have the audacity to ask that.
So here's the question. If every person who called you and every person who's feeling this way reached out to their elected officials and made themselves heard, do you think it will have a difference? Do you think those congressmen and congresswomen are going to take this and tell the government what's going on, or do you think they're going to ignore it? Because that really is the crux of the matter, isn't it?
It is. I would say history, especially going through COVID, I use that experience because that's the first one that I've really been through. I know that when I reached out, I had an initial response for about a week, but after that, it fell upon deaf ears. There was no further communication. There was no action taken, and I think that's the way that individuals feel now, currently in this present time. Is that they won't. It's fall on deaf ears.
And the thing that concerns me is. So the truck convoy in Canada is a really good example of this. And I know we're going to run a little over time, but I think this is important. The truck convoy was in spirit. It had the right motivation. You could even say it was, it had righteousness on its side. It had freedom on its side. How could it possibly have failed? But they made some very, very critical mistakes. They misunderstood the power and the complete control of the media, the legacy media. They also did not expect to have these things hurled at them from the federal government. Like there was just some critical mistakes and it's really not the fault of the leadership of that convoy because they just didn't have the experience, right? They were inexperienced. This is what I worry about. I worry about people who have the right motivation taking the wrong actions at the wrong time. And an example in Canada was when people started blockading the border. I mean, that did more damage to the U.S.-Canadian relationships for trade and hurt Canada far more than and didn't move us towards the ultimate goal that we were looking for, which was the restoration of free markets and freedom to the people. So this is my big concern is that if you have a group who has the right motivation, the right idea, but is inexperienced and takes the wrong action, it could make things far worse and not move us any closer to the ultimate goal. And now we start a positive feedback loop, which has anything but positive results.
Agreed.
Yeah, and I think you're right about, and this has been the problem I had with what happened in Canada and similar things that people tried here in the U.S. We've got an awful lot of people in here with their own agenda. And I'm not saying that's wrong. Everybody has their own agenda. Okay, they do. Whether they want to say that or not, we all have our own agendas. And sometimes those agendas conflict, and we don't have a common voice. So when you don't have a common voice, it looks like you want everything or nothing, and then they can't give it to you. And so you lose to start with. There's no winning, because there was never a point in the Canadian piece where they didn't give Trudeau a chance to be successful or fail, so he won.
Well, and they made a fundamental mistake right off the bat that I forgot to mention. They proposed in their memorandum of understanding something that, technically speaking, from a legal perspective, was undemocratic.
Right. They
were asking for a branch of our government to basically tell the elected officials in the federal government that you are no longer in power. That's not how it works. But here's the thing: on the surface, it looked very legitimate, but from a technical standpoint, it was wrong. And so this is where we have to be so very careful, because one technicality can give the opposition everything they need to kill or stop the movement before it ever really even started.
And that's what happened there. Hey guys, we are way out of time. Appreciate you both very much. I'm Tom Kelly here at tncradio.live. You can catch us and check out our primetime programming. We got great stuff going on every single day. Jamie Irvin, how do people learn more about you?
HeavyDutyPartsReport.com is our website. Go there and you have all the contact info you need to get a hold of me directly.
And James Rogers, how about for you?
You can reach me on YouTube at the Road Rage Podcast.
All right. Guys, thank you very much. We'll be back next week. Same time, same channel, right here on tncradio.live.
Reverse Gears moved to Thursdays at 8, 7 Central on the Travel Network channel, tncradio.live. You're invited to ride through the stories of and music that made the memory makers we call the soundtrack of life at our new time, 8, 7 Central, Thursdays on tncradio.live.
Don't forget, you can hear all of our TNC Radio primetime shows again on our podcasts. Just go to tncradio.live/podcasts or search for tncradio.live wherever you listen to podcasts.
Do you have the tncradio.live app? It's free and easy to download. Just go to app.tncradio.live, Google Play, or the App Store. Get access to live streaming radio developed by drivers for drivers. Download the tncradio.live app today.